You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I have Dr. Ann Williams, who is the Deputy Superintendent of Operations for School District Unit 46 and the Senior Editor of The Essentials of School Finance. Again, Dr. Williams, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Isaac.
Absolutely. And today we're going to be talking about budget and funding challenges. This might be a two-part episode because it's just a topic that's getting a lot of news press, especially with recent events. And so I just want to make sure that board members kind of understand, where does the funding come from and what are the challenges surrounding that, especially if you're just now starting your board. So let's just get started and talk about school funding, just the basics of that. First of all, Dr. Williams, who decides what goes into the budget? And could you explain the role of school board and the superintendent and really everyone kind of involved?
Absolutely. It is typically a collaborative effort between the administration and the school board. The school board ultimately approves the budget, but they don't build it out line by line. That responsibility typically falls to the school business official through the superintendent. So the superintendent sets the strategic vision, and then he or she delegates that work to the school business official, who then ensures that the budget aligns with both the vision, the financial constraints, and the goals. So that's how it's typically done.
Gotcha. And what's the timeline for that generally look like? I mean, how long does it take to compose a budget like that?
Well, in a district of my size, it's a year-round process. If we are not preparing one budget, we're wrapping up another. But the heavy lifting typically begins in the winter. You start to project staffing needs for the next year, look at capital projects and things of that nature. And then the true heavy lifting occurs during the summer months between June, July, and August when your revenue information is being finalized. And the board must adopt the budget by the end of September every year.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, it can be different for some school districts, it sounds like, but for most, it's most likely a year-round process. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, with the budget, I mean, it changes every year because of the sources that it comes from. So could we talk about what the primary sources of revenue are for districts and kind of get a sense for how reliable they are? Because again, they do change every so often.
They absolutely do. Well, the primary sources of revenue for school districts are local property taxes, state aid, and federal aid. And local property taxes typically account for about 60% of revenue throughout the state, but they can create inequities between districts with high versus low property wealth. The second largest source of revenue is state aid, primarily in the source of evidence-based funding, and that supplements what the local revenue cannot cover. Now, while the state aid that we have now under the evidence-based funding formula model is more equitable than what we had in the past, it's not always sufficient. And there are still several districts that are below the proper level of adequacy that we've identified for our schools. And the federal funds, much smaller portion, and they're typically restricted to specific programs like low income or students with special needs. Federal funding is the least predictable, and there are a lot of complex compliance requirements as it relates to federal funding.
Yeah, I mean, those applications, they don't sound easy to do. And, with all these different streams of revenue coming in, could you say about how reliable, I guess, each one would be or how much they don't change on an annual basis?
Well, I mean, local revenue is steady, and you can typically predict when you will receive that revenue. But the state and the federal funds can be delayed, they can be volatile, and because they're earmarked, they can create planning challenges.
I'm sure we've seen a lot of that in the news, especially lately with non-local revenue, federal and state being affected.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you touched on the evidence-based funding and mandated categorical grants. Those are kind of two independent streams. Could you elaborate a bit more on that and explain the differences of like tier one?
I sure can. Well, the evidence-based funding model was designed to fix the inequities in our school funding system. And that model uses 34 research-based elements. And they look at things like class size, instructional coaches, student support needs, and they look at all of these different elements to determine what is needed for each individual school district. And then the school districts are assigned a tier between 1 and 4, with tier 1 being those districts that are furthest from adequacy, and 4 being those districts that are at or above adequacy. And the districts that are furthest from adequacy receive the most funding from the evidence-based funding model. And the model is working. It is moving districts closer to adequacy. It's just not working as fast as we would like it to work. Initially, the goal was to have all districts to adequacy within 10 years, which would be by 2027. And we don't anticipate it happening anywhere near that soon. So it is still a work in progress, but it is a great improvement from where we were.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that it is working. I mean, the timelines, it's hard to predict 10 years out what the financial situation of the state will look like. And as we're seeing right now, we're kind of living through some unprecedented times, and that funding
Absolutely.
is just a bit more unclear. Could you talk about more like what a typical budget looks like and just general percentages and maybe how that money is spent in the district?
I sure can. I would imagine that every school district is spending between 65 and 70%, maybe even 75% of their budget on salaries and benefits. So that is the largest expense, the human capital. And then they're probably spending the next largest piece between 10 and 20% on purchase services and contracts. And sometimes that can be a little misleading because oftentimes, based on the district's size, they may have to outplace some of their special needs students. And so, if they outplace those students, those expenses may be paying for staff to someone else. So, it may come up as a purchase service, but it's actually a salary to support students. So the largest portion of the budget is for salaries and benefits, and about 5 to 10% goes towards supplies, equipment, and instructional materials.
Gotcha. Yeah. And with that salary part being the biggest component, it is also the role of the board to hire the superintendent. So these do kind of play hand in hand with the role of the board, not just in approving the budget, but also being responsible for hiring that superintendent.
Yeah.
Where could someone find out information on a particular school district spending? It might, because, some districts might want to know what a budget of a district of their size might look like in another region, because we've got a lot of diversity in this state, and two districts that might have the same size might have completely different needs. And it's just kind of interesting to see that. So are there ways for people to check that out?
Absolutely. The easiest way to look up any school district is to look at the school report card, the ISB school report card. But you can also go to your district's website, and there should be a section that provides your annual budget, your annual financial report, which is your audit. It provides overall information about it, probably your tax levy as well. So your district's website is a great resource, and the school board also has information for all districts. So there's a plethora of information. We try to be really transparent with the taxpayers' dollars. So that information is online.
Yeah, absolutely. That transparency is very critical, especially working with your community, making sure that they understand where their taxpayer money is going and how that's being used in that district.
Hmm.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that resource. So now that we've kind of talked about the basics of school funding, kind of got a baseline there, let's talk a bit more about the budget and funding challenges currently going on in the state, because that's just an ongoing issue, especially nowadays. We kind of touched on it a little bit briefly, so let's just dive really into that. Right out of the gate, what would you say are the most pressing budgeting and funding challenges that are currently facing Illinois school boards?
Oh my goodness. I would say inflation is definitely one. I would say staffing shortages and staffing for teachers, staffing for bus drivers, staffing for everything, special needs positions. So those are two main challenges. Another challenge on the student side is the increased student needs. More and more students are being identified in need of special education and mental health services. And, with the rate of inflation and the growing student needs and the staffing shortages, it is really just a challenge to make ends meet and provide the best outcomes for students every day.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the point about students, because I think it is definitely one of the more challenging things is you want as a district to have as many students or be there for as many students as possible and make sure they're getting high quality education, just like all the other peers have a right to. And then challenging that though is, how to fund that, especially nowadays where those funding streams just aren't as accessible anymore. It just really puts districts in a bit of a tight spot. It's like, how do we best serve our district in a way that doesn't, totally spend all of our money or have us go over into a deficit?
Yeah, yeah. And a lot of times districts will postpone much needed maintenance and capital improvements so that the
Mm,
funds are spent directly on the students. But there is an impact indirectly when we do postpone maintenance and capital improvements so that we can provide an environment that is truly beneficial to student success.
yeah, that's definitely very difficult. I can imagine each board meeting having to look at the budget and just figure, man, how do we best distribute these funds in a way that everyone kind of gets a piece of the pie and can be served equitably there.
Hmm.
Um, and we did talk about the evidence-based funding model previously. How has that impacted school budgets since its implementation?
I think it has had a good impact on districts that are primarily low property wealth. It is helping them have additional funding on an annual basis. The evidence-based funding model also has a hold harmless in it, so districts will never receive less than they received the previous year. So they can build upon that and possibly add positions. Like we were just talking about the additional mental health needs. A lot of people are adding, or a lot of districts rather, are adding support positions through the use of that evidence-based funding. So it is definitely helping, but we have some ways to go.
Yeah, there is light at the end of the tunnel. It just bring those ebbs and flows. It feels like to the financial stability
Yeah,
out there
it's a long
sometimes.
tunnel.
It is. It really is a long tunnel, but it's there, and we'll
Mhm.
get through the other side of it for sure. How do you think boards can effectively advocate for adequate and equitable state funding or alternative revenue sources? Because there's only so much they can do. Sometimes you just need to kind of get to the state legislator and get some messaging across. So how do you think they can best do that?
Well, I think a large part of it is about staying informed and staying engaged. As you mentioned,
Hmm.
meeting with legislators, testifying at hearings. The most effective advocacy really includes providing real life stories of how things are working, how things are not working, and what might be helpful. So if you can identify spending associated with, let's just say, evidence-based funding and how it moved the needle for students, that is the most effective advocacy from my perspectives. Districts and school boards should definitely partner with associations like yours, the Association of School Boards, the Association of School Administrators, and the Association of School Business Officials. We all work towards educating and informing administrators and school boards so that they can reach out to their legislators.
Yeah, and ISB has an advocacy ambassador program for those board members who want to take it a step further and really be engaged with the legislative going-ons at the state capitol. And I'll say as well, from a couple episodes ago, I was interviewing somebody in our government relations office, and they said that if board members don't inform their state legislators about how something might affect their school district, they just simply won't know necessarily what the
Right.
impact is because no one's telling them. So they need that type of feedback and understanding of, hey, this legislation that you're proposing or considering, this might affect my district, really good, or this might hurt us more than you probably realize. And so having those conversations is incredibly critical to make sure that your voice is being heard at the state level.
Absolutely.
And it's hard. This question is hard to answer without just saying you need a crystal ball because it seems so impossible. But I mean, how can school boards plan for future financial stability in an uncertain economic environment?
Well, that is a great question. And I think the key here is just to make sure that you have financial projections, 5-year projections, 5 or 10-year projections in some cases, and that you're updating them often. Typically, school districts will update their projections on an annual basis as they work to prepare the tax levy and the budget. But I think in these uncertain times, we need to do a better job of updating our projections maybe 2 or 3 times a year, especially in light of some of the changes that are occurring at the federal administration level. Some of the mandated categorical grants are being prorated. So you may need to make some assumptions to see how your district will be able to respond if certain things happen. And just understanding that you don't know what you don't know. So all you can do is inform yourself with the what ifs and consider all of the scenarios and how you might respond.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point of updating your projections multiple times a year because it forces you to take a look at your budget and all everything going on around it and kind of analyze what are things that we can control versus what are things that are simply out of our control that we just have to kind of go with the flow with, unfortunately. And it helps you as a district be informed about your abilities that you can make as a result of those things that you just simply can't change. And it lets you be nimble because otherwise, if you're only doing it maybe once a year, it seems like you're leaving yourself to be very susceptible to being caught off guard by something that might have been able to be caught had it been thought through a couple of months prior, or if you were doing these more recurring changes to your budget.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. School board should also look at an academic ROI mindset. If you are spending a lot of money on programs that aren't moving the needle, that really needs to be evaluated. And
Yeah,
there is a better way to spend those funds that will move the needle. So I think that that's important as well.
I totally agree. And we have a lot of resources for board members. Of course, just starting out, but veteran board members as well. If they want more information about just budgeting and funding challenges in Illinois that affect school districts, we have a free download on our website called Understanding School Finance. It's a great place to get started. Of course, we've got the Essentials of School Finance book, which is a fantastic resource for our board members on our bookstore. And of course, we've got free webinars on our website for all ISB members. And Friday Focus workshops at conference will be focusing on this topic as well. So we highly encourage board members to take the time to come up to Chicago and get involved in some of those Friday Focus workshops if they have questions or want to get more understanding about what school budgeting and finance looks like.
Yes, come to Friday Focus. We'll be talking about dollars and decisions. So let's do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, thank you, Dr. Williams, for coming on the podcast and providing some clarity and some context for just what school budgeting is and some of the challenges around it. I think is really informative and helps some of our newer board members who are probably just now serving on the first couple of board meetings and providing some additional resources for them to get more involved and more informed about what it means to budget for a school board in Illinois. So thank you so much for bringing your expertise to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. And I look forward to seeing some of our newer board members in November.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.